the last time anyone saw Melissa and Crawford alive, she was standing in the parking lot of a gas station in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, arguing with someone in a dark pickup truck. The date was September 14th, 2004. The temperature was 87 degrees. The sky was clear and blue and promised nothing of the darkness that would soon swallow this small community whole. Melissa was 32 years old, a mother of 2 young boys, and by all accounts, a woman who had finally started to turn her life around. She had just gotten a new job at the local hospital, working as a medical records clerk. She had just signed a lease on a small apartment, determined to give her sons a stable home after years of chaos. She had just told her mother, 2 days before she disappeared, that for the first time in years, she felt hope. And then she was gone. Not gradually, not with warning signs or farewell letters. Just gone. As if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole, leaving behind nothing but questions and a silence so loud it would haunt this community for 2 decades. I'm going to tell you a story tonight, and I need you to understand something before we begin. This isn't just another true crime case. This isn't just another missing person who became a statistic, a cold file gathering dust in some detective's drawer. This is a story about what happens when we think we know someone. When we trust the wrong face, believe the wrong smile, and ignore the whispers that our instincts try to tell us. This is a story about betrayal so profound that when the truth finally came out, 20 years after Melissa Crawford vanished, it didn't just shock the community of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. It shattered everything they thought they knew about justice, about friendship, and about the monsters who walk among us wearing the faces of people we love. If you've ever wondered how someone can disappear without a trace, if you've ever asked yourself how evil can hide in plain sight for 20 years, then you need to stay until the very end of this story. And if this story moves you, if it makes you think, if it keeps you up tonight wondering about the Melissas in your own community who might be crying out for help, then I need you to do something for me right now. Share this video. Subscribe to this channel. Because stories like Melissa's only matter if we refuse to let them be forgotten. Someone you know needs to hear this. Someone scrolling past right now needs to stop and pay attention. Don't let them miss this. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Melissa and Crawford was born on March 3, 1972, in a small town called Reason, about 30 miles south of Pine Bluff. Her father worked at the paper mill, and her mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the other side of town. Melissa was the middle child of 5, sandwiched between 2 older brothers who joined the military and 2 younger sisters who would later marry and move away. From the beginning, Melissa was different. She was the dreamer, the one who stayed up late reading romance novels by flashlight, the one who wrote poetry in the margins of her school notebooks, the one who believed that somewhere out there, a life better than the one she was born into was waiting for her. But life in rural Arkansas in the 1970s and 1980s didn't offer many escape routes for girls like Melissa. She got pregnant at 17, dropped out of high school 3 months before graduation, and married the baby's father, a 20-year-old named Danny Whitmore, who worked at his father's auto body shop. The marriage lasted 4 years and produced 1 son, a boy named Tyler. It ended when Danny's drinking got so bad that Melissa found herself sleeping in the closet with Tyler, hiding from the sound of breaking glass and raised fists. She left Danny in 1993 and spent the next decade trying to find her footing. There were other relationships, other disappointments, another pregnancy that gave her a second son, Marcus, in 1998. The father of that child stuck around for exactly 8 months before disappearing to Texas with a woman he met at a truck stop. Melissa worked waitressing jobs, cashier jobs, cleaning jobs. She struggled with depression. She made mistakes. But through it all, her mother later told investigators, Melissa never stopped believing that her breakthrough was coming. She never stopped hoping. And in the summer of 2004, it finally seemed like hope was paying off. She had gotten her GED. She had completed a 6-month program to become a certified medical records technician. She had landed the job at Jefferson Regional Medical Center, a real job with benefits and a future. She had found the apartment on 8th Avenue, small but clean, with a yard where Tyler and Marcus could play. Everything was finally coming together. So what happened? The last confirmed sighting of Melissa Crawford was at 7:42 p.m. on September 14, 2004. A gas station attendant named Ronnie Mills would later tell police that he remembered her because she seemed upset. She had been standing by the payphone near the air pumps, and then a dark-colored pickup truck had pulled up. Ronnie couldn't see the driver clearly, but he could tell it was a man. He could tell there was an argument. Melissa had gotten into the truck, and it had pulled away heading east toward the river. Ronnie had thought about calling the police, but then his shift got busy and he forgot about it. By the time he remembered, by the time he realized he might have been the last person to see Melissa Crawford, it was too late. Her mother reported her missing on September 16th, when Melissa failed to show up for work and didn't answer her phone. Her apartment was found unlocked, her purse sitting on the kitchen counter, her car parked in its usual spot. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of packing, no sign that she had planned to go anywhere at all. Her boys had been staying with their grandmother that week while Melissa got settled into her new job schedule. They would never see their mother again. The Pine Bluff Police Department opened a missing persons investigation immediately, but from the beginning, they had almost nothing to work with. No witnesses except Ronnie Mills and his vague description of a dark truck. No forensic evidence. No digital trail, because Melissa didn't own a computer and her cell phone, a prepaid flip phone, had gone dark that same night. The detectives assigned to the case interviewed everyone they could think of: family, friends, co-workers, ex-boyfriends, neighbors, but every lead went nowhere. Every tip fizzled out. The weeks became months. The months became years. And slowly, painfully, the case went cold. The detectives retired or transferred. The file was moved to storage. The community moved on, the way communities always do, burying their grief beneath the daily business of living. But some people never forgot. Some people never stopped asking questions. Some people spent 20 years carrying a weight that no one should have to carry alone. And one of those people, the one who carried the heaviest weight of all, was about to make a decision that would crack this case wide open and expose a secret so dark, so close to home, that it would make the people of Pine Bluff question everything they thought they knew about their neighbors, their friends, and themselves. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get to the arrest that shocked the community, before we get to the moment when 20 years of silence finally shattered, you need to understand who Melissa really was. You need to understand the web of relationships that surrounded her in those final months. And you need to understand that the answer to what happened to her was hiding in plain sight the entire time. Every missing person case has a cast of characters, and Melissa Crawford's story was no exception. To understand how she disappeared, to understand how the truth stayed buried for 2 decades, you first have to understand the people who populated her world in those final months of her life. You have to understand the circle. At the center was Melissa herself, 32 years old, trying harder than she ever had to build something stable. She had been working at Jefferson Regional for just 3 weeks when she vanished. Her co-workers would later describe her as quiet but friendly, someone who kept her head down and did her work, someone who seemed grateful just to be there. She ate lunch alone in the break room most days, reading paperback novels from the library, and checking her phone for messages from her boys. She left exactly at 5 o'clock every day, eager to get home and prepare for when Tyler and Marcus would come back from their grandmother's house. Then there was her mother, Patricia Crawford, a 61-year-old widow who had buried her husband 2 years earlier and now devoted her life to her grandchildren. Patricia was the one who first knew something was wrong. She was the one who called the police, who organized the searches, who spent years putting up flyers and attending vigils, and refusing to accept that her daughter might never come home. For 20 years, Patricia would be the loudest voice demanding answers. For 20 years, she would tell anyone who would listen that someone in this community knew what happened to Melissa, and that someone would one day have to answer for it. She was right, though she couldn't have imagined how right she was. There was Danny Whitmore, Melissa's first husband and Tyler's father. By 2004, Danny had cleaned up considerably. He had gotten sober, remarried, and was running his late father's auto body shop. He had even rebuilt a civil relationship with Melissa, sharing custody of Tyler and occasionally helping her out with money when times were tight. When Melissa disappeared, Danny was one of the first people police interviewed. His alibi checked out. Multiple witnesses placed him at a church event on the night of September 14th, a men's fellowship meeting that lasted until almost 10 o'clock. Danny passed a polygraph. He cooperated fully with investigators. And yet, Patricia Crawford never fully trusted him. "There's something behind his eyes," she would later say. "Something he's not telling." There was Marcus's father, a man named Jerome Patterson, who had fled to Texas years earlier and had virtually no contact with Melissa since. He was tracked down by investigators in 2005, living in Houston and working construction. His alibi was airtight. He had been on a job site 1,000 miles away when Melissa vanished. He expressed shock and sadness at the news, but he made no effort to return to Arkansas, no effort to connect with the son he had abandoned. Marcus would grow up never knowing his father, and perhaps that was for the best. There was Melissa's best friend, a woman named Shannon Kelly, who worked as a hairdresser at a salon downtown. Shannon and Melissa had been close since high school, two dreamers from the wrong side of town who had clung to each other through every disappointment. Shannon was the one Melissa called when she couldn't sleep, the one she confided in about her relationships and her fears and her hopes. When Melissa disappeared, Shannon was devastated. She threw herself into the search efforts, organized fundraisers for the investigation, and became Patricia Crawford's closest ally in the fight for answers. For 20 years, Shannon would publicly grieve her best friend. For 20 years, she would cry at the vigils, post on social media on the anniversary of Melissa's disappearance, and swear that she would never stop fighting for justice. Remember Shannon Kelly. Hold her name in your mind, because this story is about to take a turn that will make you question everything. And then there was the final member of Melissa's inner circle, the one whose name would eventually become synonymous with the darkest chapter of this tragedy. His name was Robert Dean Holloway. Everyone called him Bobby. Bobby Holloway was 41 years old in 2004, a respected member of the Pine Bluff community, a deacon at First Baptist Church, and the owner of a small landscaping company that employed a dozen local men. He was married to his high school sweetheart, a woman named Linda, and they had 3 grown children who had all moved away to Little Rock and Memphis. Bobby was known for his generosity, his faith, and his willingness to help anyone in need. When the paper mill had layoffs in 2002, Bobby hired several of the displaced workers. When Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast in 2005, Bobby organized relief trips to Mississippi. He coached Little League, led Bible studies, and never missed a Sunday service. Bobby Holloway was also, as it turns out, Melissa Crawford's secret. No one knew about their relationship. Not Patricia, not Shannon, not Danny, not anyone. Melissa had kept it completely hidden, meeting Bobby at cheap motels outside of town, communicating through prepaid phones and handwritten notes passed through intermediaries. They had been seeing each other for almost a year before she vanished, and during that time, Melissa had begun to believe that Bobby was going to leave his wife for her. She had written about it in a journal that wouldn't be discovered until years later, a journal hidden in a shoebox in the back of her mother's closet, a journal that revealed a woman desperately in love with a man who had promised her the world. "He says Linda is cold," one entry read. "He says he's only staying for appearances, for the church, for his reputation. But soon, he says, we won't have to hide anymore. Soon we'll be together, and I'll finally have the life I've been dreaming about." That journal would become the key to everything. But in 2004, no one knew it existed. The shoebox remained hidden. Bobby Holloway remained above suspicion, and Melissa Crawford remained gone. In the months after Melissa's disappearance, Bobby Holloway was never interviewed by police. His name never came up. He continued his life as if nothing had happened, attending the same church services, running the same business, sleeping in the same bed next to the same wife. At the one-year vigil for Melissa, Bobby and Linda Holloway were there, standing solemnly with the rest of the community, holding candles and bowing their heads in prayer. Patricia Crawford would later recall shaking Bobby's hand that night. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he had told her. "Melissa seemed like a wonderful woman. I'll be praying for you." 20 years. For 20 years, Bobby Holloway walked among them, prayed with them, broke bread with them, all while knowing exactly where Melissa Crawford was, all while carrying a secret so heavy that it should have crushed him. But it didn't crush him. Instead, it seemed to make him stronger, bolder, more certain that he had gotten away with it forever. What Bobby Holloway didn't count on was conscience. Not his own conscience, which had apparently calcified into something cold and impenetrable, but the conscience of someone else. Someone who had helped him on that terrible night in 2004 and had spent every day since trapped in a prison of guilt and fear. Someone who finally decided, after 20 years of silence, that they couldn't live with the weight anymore. The years after Melissa Crawford's disappearance moved like molasses through Pine Bluff, slow and thick and suffocating for those who refused to forget. But for the rest of the community, time did what it always does. It softened the edges of tragedy. It turned a missing woman into an old story, a cautionary tale parents told their daughters about the dangers of going out alone at night, a name that younger residents barely recognized. Tyler Whitmore, Melissa's firstborn, grew up in his father's house, raised by Danny and his stepmother. He became a quiet, serious young man who worked at the auto body shop after high school and rarely spoke about his mother. When reporters came around on the anniversary of her disappearance, Tyler would refuse to comment. "I've said everything I have to say," he would mutter before walking away. But those who knew him saw the way he flinched whenever someone mentioned Melissa's name, saw the darkness that passed over his face like a cloud blocking the sun. Marcus, the younger son, was raised entirely by his grandmother Patricia. He grew up calling her Mama and sleeping in his mother's old bedroom, surrounded by photographs of the woman who had vanished when he was only 6 years old. Unlike Tyler, Marcus was hungry for information, desperate to understand what had happened. He became obsessed with true crime, with unsolved cases, with the mechanics of investigation. By the time he was in high school, Marcus knew more about his mother's case than most of the detectives who had worked it. "Someone knows," Marcus would tell his grandmother. "Someone in this town knows exactly what happened to her, and they're walking around free while we suffer. That's not right, Mama. That can't be how this ends." Patricia would hold him and tell him to trust in God, to believe that justice would come in its own time. But privately, she was losing faith. Every year that passed, every lead that went nowhere, every politician who promised to prioritize cold cases and then forgot about them, it all chipped away at her hope. By 2020, Patricia Crawford was 80 years old, diabetic, and confined to a wheelchair. She had spent more than half her remaining life waiting for answers that never came. "I thought I would know," she confessed to a reporter on the 16th anniversary. "I thought God would at least give me that. The peace of knowing what happened to my baby before I go to meet him. But I don't know. I still don't know. And some days, that feels like the cruelest thing of all." Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. Think about it. Leave your answer in the comments below. If you knew something terrible, something that could destroy lives if it came out, but staying silent was destroying your soul, how long could you carry that weight? How many years could you wake up every morning and choose silence? How many nights could you lie awake, knowing that somewhere a mother was crying for answers you could give her? Because that's exactly the situation that someone in Pine Bluff found themselves in. For 20 years, someone carried that weight. And finally, mercifully, terribly, they broke. But we're not there yet. We're still in the cold years, the long stretch of nothing where hope went to die. The Pine Bluff Police Department officially moved Melissa Crawford's case to inactive status in 2008. There was no fanfare, no announcement. One day the file was on a detective's desk, and the next day it was in a basement storage room, filed alphabetically between Connors and Davidson. The lead detective, a man named Harold Freeman, retired in 2010 without ever solving the case that haunted him most. "I always knew someone was lying to us," Freeman said in his retirement interview with the local paper. "You work these cases long enough, you develop an instinct. And my instinct told me that we talked to the person responsible. We looked them in the eye, and they lied to us, and we didn't catch it. That's the failure I'll take to my grave." Harold Freeman died of a heart attack in 2017. He never knew how close he had come. Bobby Holloway, meanwhile, flourished during the cold years. His landscaping business expanded into 2 neighboring counties. His wife Linda was appointed to the city council and later became vice mayor. His grandchildren won academic awards and sports trophies, and Bobby was there at every ceremony, beaming with pride, the picture of a successful patriarch. He even received a Community Service Award from the Chamber of Commerce in 2015, recognized for his decades of charitable work and civic engagement. The photograph of him accepting the award, shaking hands with the mayor, smiling that broad practice smile, would later be reproduced in dozens of news articles about the case. Caption: Bobby Holloway, months before his arrest for murder. But if you looked closely at Bobby Holloway during those years, if you knew where to look and what to look for, you might have noticed the cracks. The way he startled too easily at loud noises. The way he sometimes lost himself in the middle of conversations, his eyes going distant and hollow. The way he began drinking more heavily in his 50s, hiding bottles of whiskey in his workshop, coming to church services with bloodshot eyes. Linda Holloway noticed. Their children noticed. But they chalked it up to stress, to aging, to the pressures of running a business. They never imagined the truth. And then there was Shannon Kelly, Melissa's best friend, the woman who had cried at every vigil and never stopped publicly mourning. Shannon's behavior during the cold years was, in retrospect, peculiar. She moved away from Pine Bluff in 2006, relocating to Texarkana on the Texas border, about 200 miles southwest. She cut ties with most of her old friends. She stopped attending the anniversary vigils. When Patricia Crawford tried to reach her, Shannon's responses were short and distant, excuses about being busy with work and life. Patricia attributed it to grief, to the way some people need to escape reminders of trauma. She never suspected the real reason. Because Shannon Kelly knew. She had known since the night of September 14, 2004. She had been there, in the passenger seat of Bobby Holloway's dark pickup truck, when everything went wrong. She had helped him hide the evidence, dispose of the body, construct the alibi that would hold for 2 decades. She had looked Patricia Crawford in the eye at those early vigils and cried crocodile tears for a woman whose grave she had helped to dig. Why? That's the question that would consume Pine Bluff when the truth finally came out. Why would Melissa's best friend betray her in the most complete way possible? The answer, like all answers in stories like this, was complicated. It involved love, jealousy, fear, and the terrible algebra of choices made in moments of panic. But for 20 years, Shannon Kelly kept her silence. She built a new life in Texarkana, got married, had children, went to PTA meetings and neighborhood barbecues. She tried to bury the past beneath the routines of domesticity. She almost succeeded. Almost. In February of 2024, Shannon Kelly's marriage fell apart. Her husband, a man named Richard who sold insurance and knew nothing of her history, discovered that she had been having an affair with a coworker. The divorce was bitter and public, the kind that tears apart not just a marriage but an entire constructed life. Shannon lost custody of her 2 children. She lost the house, the savings, the carefully maintained facade of normalcy. And without that facade, without the structure of daily life to hold her together, Shannon Kelly began to unravel. She started drinking heavily. She lost her job at the medical office where she had worked for 15 years. She stopped paying her bills, stopped returning calls, stopped pretending that she was okay. Her sister, who lived in Hot Springs, drove to Texarkana in March to check on her and found Shannon in a state of complete breakdown, sobbing on the floor of an empty apartment, surrounded by empty bottles and old photographs. "I can't do this anymore," Shannon kept repeating. "I can't carry it anymore. She won't stop looking at me, Carol. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I see what we did. And I can't anymore." Carol Kelly had no idea what her sister was talking about. She assumed it was the divorce, the alcohol, perhaps a mental health crisis. She checked Shannon into a psychiatric facility in Little Rock, hoping that professionals could help where family had failed. And that's where everything changed. During her 3rd week of treatment, Shannon Kelly asked to speak with a social worker. She said she had something to confess, something she had been carrying for 20 years, something that had been eating her alive since 2004. The social worker, following protocol, called the police. Two detectives from the Arkansas State Police Cold Case Unit arrived at the facility on March 28, 2024. They expected another delusional confession, another mentally ill person taking credit for crimes they didn't commit. What they got instead was the most significant break in the Melissa Crawford case since it began. Over the course of 3 separate interviews, spanning more than 12 hours, Shannon Kelly told them everything. She told them about Bobby Holloway, about the affair that Melissa had been having with him for almost a year, about how Shannon had found out, not because Melissa told her, but because Bobby had been pursuing Shannon too. He had approached her at a bar in June of 2004, flirted with her, told her she was beautiful, suggested they get together sometime. Shannon, who had always been jealous of Melissa's ability to attract men, had been flattered. She had no idea that Bobby was already sleeping with her best friend. When she found out, something broke inside her. The jealousy that had been simmering for years turned to rage. Not at Bobby, but at Melissa. Perfect Melissa, who always got everything Shannon wanted. Who was finally getting her life together while Shannon was stuck in a dead-end job and a string of failed relationships. Who even stole the one man who had paid attention to Shannon in months. Shannon confronted Bobby, and instead of defending Melissa, he turned the situation to his advantage. He told Shannon that Melissa was becoming a problem, that she was threatening to tell his wife, to destroy his family, to ruin his reputation. He said he needed Shannon's help. He said they could be together if she just did this one thing for him. "I was so stupid," Shannon told the detectives, weeping. "I was so desperate to be loved, to be chosen, that I agreed to help him. I thought we were just going to scare her. I thought we were going to warn her to stay away from him. I never thought." She broke down completely, and the detectives had to pause the interview. When she continued, she described the events of September 14, 2004, in horrifying detail. Bobby Holloway had planned it for weeks. He knew Melissa's schedule, knew when her sons would be at Patricia's house, knew that Tuesday was the night she usually went to the laundromat on the east side of town. He told Shannon to wait in the truck while he approached her at the gas station, told Shannon to keep the engine running, told Shannon that this would be quick and clean. But it wasn't quick, and it wasn't clean. Bobby and Melissa's conversation at the gas station started calm, but escalated rapidly. Melissa had recently given Bobby an ultimatum: tell Linda about their relationship, or Melissa would tell her herself. She was tired of hiding. She was tired of being someone's secret. She had just gotten her life together, and she wasn't going to spend it as a married man's mistress. Bobby couldn't let that happen. His marriage, his church, his business, his entire carefully constructed life would crumble if the truth came out. He had tried reasoning with Melissa. He had tried promising her more time. But Melissa was done waiting. She had written in her journal just days before, "I told him this is it. Either we go public, or I walk away. I deserve more than hiding. My boys deserve a mother who isn't someone's shame." In the parking lot that night, Melissa told Bobby she was going to Linda the next morning. Bobby felt something snap. According to Shannon, who watched from the truck, Bobby grabbed Melissa's arm and pulled her toward the vehicle. Melissa struggled, tried to break free, but Bobby was bigger and stronger. He shoved her into the back seat, where Shannon was now sitting frozen with terror, and climbed in after her. He told Shannon to drive, and she did, because she was too scared to do anything else. They drove east, toward the river, down back roads that Bobby knew from his landscaping work. Melissa was screaming, crying, begging them to stop, to let her go, to think about her sons. Shannon would later say that those screams were what she heard every night for 20 years, what drove her to drink, what finally brought her to that psychiatric facility. "Please," Melissa had sobbed. "Please, Shannon. You're my best friend. Don't do this. Please." But Shannon didn't stop the truck. They pulled off onto a dirt road that led to an abandoned hunting cabin, property that Bobby had acquired years ago through his business. Bobby dragged Melissa inside. Shannon stayed in the truck, covering her ears, trying to block out the sounds. She told the detectives she didn't see what happened next. She only heard it. Heard the struggle, heard Melissa's screams cut short, heard the silence that followed. When Bobby came out of the cabin 20 minutes later, his shirt was bloody and he was carrying a shovel. "She's not going to be a problem anymore," he said. They buried Melissa Crawford in a shallow grave behind the cabin, in a patch of soft earth near a creek that fed into the Arkansas River. Bobby covered the site with brush and debris. He burned his bloody clothes. He cleaned the truck with bleach. And then he drove Shannon home and told her that if she ever spoke of this night, he would kill her too. For 20 years, Shannon believed him. The Arkansas State Police executed a search warrant on Bobby Holloway's property on April 3, 2024. Using the directions Shannon had provided, they located the abandoned hunting cabin within hours. The cabin was still standing, overgrown with vines and surrounded by 20 years of unchecked vegetation. Behind it, near the creek, cadaver dogs alerted almost immediately. They found Melissa Crawford's remains in a grave that was only 2 feet deep, wrapped in a blue tarp that had partially decomposed over the decades. Her bones were largely intact, preserved by the clay-heavy soil. Mixed with the remains were fragments of her clothing, a silver ring that Patricia would later identify as belonging to her daughter, and a small gold cross necklace that Melissa had worn since her baptism at age 12. Patricia Crawford was 84 years old when she received the call. She had been in a nursing home for 2 years, her body failing but her mind still sharp enough to remember every detail of her daughter's face. When the detective told her they had found Melissa, that they finally knew what happened, Patricia didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for not letting me die without knowing." Bobby Holloway was arrested at his home at 6:15 a.m. on April 4, 2024. His wife Linda was standing in the kitchen when 6 officers came through the front door with weapons drawn. Bobby didn't resist. He didn't even seem surprised. As they handcuffed him and read him his rights, he reportedly looked at Linda and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Linda Holloway collapsed. She was treated at the scene by paramedics and later released. She filed for divorce 3 days later and has not spoken publicly since. The arrest of Bobby Holloway sent shockwaves through Pine Bluff unlike anything the community had ever experienced. This was a man they had known, trusted, worshipped beside. He had baptized their children. He had mowed their lawns. He had sat on the church board and helped decide matters of faith and morality. And all along, he had been a murderer. The newspaper headline read, "Pillar of Community Charged in 2004 Slaying." The story was picked up by national media. Reporters descended on Pine Bluff, asking the same questions that the residents themselves couldn't stop asking. How did we not see it? How did we not know? How could evil hide so perfectly in plain sight? There were no good answers. There never are in stories like this. The truth is that monsters rarely look like monsters. They look like deacons and businessmen and little league coaches. They look like neighbors and friends and people we trust with our secrets. That's what makes them so dangerous. That's what allowed Bobby Holloway to walk free for 20 years while Melissa Crawford lay in a shallow grave, forgotten by everyone except the people who loved her. Shannon Kelly was charged as an accessory to murder after the fact. Because of her cooperation with investigators and her testimony against Bobby Holloway, she was offered a plea deal that would result in a significantly reduced sentence. As of this recording, she is awaiting sentencing and facing a maximum of 15 years in prison. Bobby Holloway, meanwhile, was charged with first-degree murder. He initially pleaded not guilty, but as the evidence mounted and it became clear that a conviction was inevitable, he changed his plea. In January 2025, Robert Dean Holloway pleaded guilty to the murder of Melissa and Crawford and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, Patricia Crawford was too frail to attend. But Marcus was there, the little boy who had become a man, who had spent his entire adult life searching for answers about his mother. He was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. Marcus Crawford stood at the podium in the Jefferson County Courthouse, 32 years old, the same age his mother had been when she died. He had her eyes, Patricia often said. Her dreamer's eyes, full of hope despite everything. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the emotion visible on his face. "I was 6 years old when my mother disappeared. I don't have many memories of her, but I have impressions. I remember the way she smelled, like lavender and something warm. I remember the sound of her laugh, which I used to hear in my dreams. I remember her telling me, the last time I saw her, that she was going to make everything better for us. She said, "Mama's got a good job now, baby. We're going to have our own place, and it's going to be beautiful." He paused, collecting himself. She never got to give us that place. She never got to see me graduate high school, or start my business, or meet the woman I'm going to marry. She never got to meet her grandchildren, who I hope to have someday. She never got to grow old with my grandmother, who spent the last 20 years of her life praying for answers. My grandmother died 3 months ago. She held on just long enough to know that my mother had been found, that the man responsible had been caught. And then she let go. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of people weeping. "I want to address Mr. Holloway directly," Marcus continued, turning to look at the man in the orange jumpsuit. "You stole my mother from me. You stole her future, her dreams, her chance to see her boys grow up. But you also stole something else. You stole 20 years from this community. 20 years of people trusting you, believing in you, looking up to you. You made fools of everyone who ever shook your hand or listened to your prayers. And the worst part is, you didn't seem to feel any remorse. You slept soundly while my grandmother cried herself to sleep every night. You accepted awards while my brother Tyler drank himself into silence. You played with your grandchildren while I grew up wondering if my mother had abandoned me, if she hadn't loved me enough to stay." Marcus's voice finally cracked. "But here's what you didn't steal, my mother's memory. Her legacy, the love she left behind. I am who I am because of Melissa Crawford. I carry her hope with me, her belief that life can get better, that breakthrough is always possible. And today, standing here, getting to look you in the eye and tell you that you will die in a prison cell while I go on living, building, loving, that is her breakthrough. That is her victory." He turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for vengeance. My mother wouldn't have wanted that. But I am asking for justice, which we finally have. And I'm asking for something else, that this community remembers. Not just my mother, but all the women who disappear, who are forgotten, whose cases grow cold while their killers walk free. Let my mother's case be a reminder that it's never too late, that the truth has a way of surfacing, that the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, eventually balances the scales." Marcus stepped down from the podium as the courtroom erupted in applause, something that almost never happens at sentencing hearings. Bobby Holloway was led away in chains, and he never looked back. In the months following Bobby Holloway's sentencing, the community of Pine Bluff began a slow, painful process of reckoning and healing. The First Baptist Church, where Bobby had served as deacon for decades, held a special service of repentance and renewal. The pastor spoke about the dangers of placing too much trust in human beings, about the need to look beneath surfaces, about the importance of listening to that small voice inside that whispers when something isn't right. Shannon Kelly wrote a letter to Marcus Crawford, apologizing for her role in his mother's death. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she knew she didn't deserve it. But she wanted him to know that not a single day had passed in 20 years when she didn't think about Melissa, didn't regret what she had allowed to happen, didn't wish she had made different choices. Marcus hasn't responded to the letter. He may never respond. Some wounds don't heal, and some forgiveness takes more than a single lifetime to achieve. But he told reporters that he had read it, that he understood Shannon was suffering too, and that he hoped she would find some kind of peace. Tyler Whitmore, Melissa's firstborn, finally agreed to be interviewed for the first time since his mother's disappearance. He spoke about the anger he had carried for decades, anger at his mother for leaving, at the world for forgetting her, at himself for not being able to protect her. He spoke about the relief he felt when he learned the truth, a relief mixed with a grief so profound he could barely put it into words. "For 20 years, part of me wondered if she had just left," Tyler admitted. "If she had gotten tired of us, of the struggle, of Arkansas, and just walked away. People told me that wasn't true, that she would never leave us, but doubt is a poison. It gets into everything. Now I know. She didn't leave. She was taken, and the person who took her is finally paying the price." Tyler and Marcus, who had been estranged for years, have begun rebuilding their relationship. They had dinner together for the first time in a decade on what would have been Melissa's 53rd birthday. They lit a candle, shared memories of their mother, and made a promise to each other. They would not let tragedy define them. They would carry Melissa's legacy forward, building the kind of lives she had dreamed of for them. Marcus announced the creation of the Melissa Crawford Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting cold case investigations in Arkansas. The foundation provides funding for DNA testing, private investigators, and family support services for loved ones of missing persons. Within 6 months of its launch, the foundation helped bring resolution to 3 other cold cases, reuniting families with answers they had been waiting decades to receive. "This is what my mother would have wanted," Marcus said at the foundation's inaugural gala. "She always believed in helping people. She always believed that things could get better. Now she's helping people even though she's gone. Her spirit lives on in every family we serve, in every case we help solve, in every piece of closure we're able to provide. That's her legacy. That's her triumph." The city of Pine Bluff dedicated a memorial garden to Melissa Crawford in the spring of 2025, located in the same park where the anniversary vigils had been held for 20 years. The garden features a bronze plaque with Melissa's photograph and a quote that Marcus had found in her journal, written just weeks before her death. "I believe that my best days are still ahead of me. I believe that everything I've been through has been preparing me for something beautiful." Visitors to the garden often leave flowers, notes, and small tokens of remembrance. Mothers bring their daughters to teach them about safety and awareness. Fathers bring their sons to teach them about respect and accountability. The garden has become a place of pilgrimage for cold case advocates from around the country, a symbol of what can happen when people refuse to give up, refuse to forget, refuse to let the guilty rest easy. And somewhere, perhaps watching over that garden, perhaps watching over her sons as they finally learn to live without the shadow of uncertainty, Melissa and Crawford is at peace. She was never forgotten. She was never abandoned. And in the end, she got the justice she deserved. The story of Melissa Crawford reminds us that truth is patient. It waits. It bides its time. And eventually, inevitably, it finds its way to the light. 20 years is a long time to wait for justice. But justice came. 20 years is a long time to carry guilt, but guilt finally broke through the dam of silence. 20 years is a long time to grieve without answers, but answers finally arrived. If there's one thing you take away from this story, let it be this. Never stop asking questions. Never stop demanding answers. Never stop believing that the truth will surface, no matter how deeply it's been buried. Because somewhere, right now, there's another Melissa Crawford. There's another family waiting for news. There's another killer walking free, believing they've gotten away with it. They haven't. They never do. Not really. Because the universe keeps receipts. And someday, somehow, the bill always comes due. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Thank you for honoring Melissa Crawford's memory by bearing witness to what happened to her. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the importance of justice and persistence, then please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the other stories we tell, stories of victims who deserve to be remembered, of mysteries waiting to be solved, of communities fighting for truth against impossible odds. And if you know something, if you're carrying a secret that's eating you alive, let Melissa Crawford's story be your reminder that it's never too late to come forward. Shannon Kelly carried her guilt for 20 years, and it destroyed her. Don't let it destroy you too. The truth will set you free. It always does. In the end, it always does.